We're live.
Oh, because I forgot we haven't got the introduction music, have we? I was waiting for a little. Hello, everyone. Hello.
I'm going to call this. I'm going to call this my COVID fringe because I've obviously just been.
It's got like it could be worse. It could be literally like mine used to be when my mum used to cut it just randomly.
Yeah,
it wasn't even a bowl cut.
It was. I look like Peter Noon, don't I? No vegan milk today. Remember Peter Noon from the Herman's Hermits? Do you remember
that? I vaguely know the name Herman's Hermits, and I can imagine very 60s type bowl haircuts, if that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah, look, they started already.
Did you use a flower pot?
No, it was one of those bowls, salad bowl thing.
So who we got? We've got Elliot here, and we've got Louisa, and we've got Tom, Major Tom. We've got Nikki and Deb, and we got that's it. That's it so far. Say hello if you're here and you want to say hello to us. So yeah, the reason for this live is a week or so ago, it might have been longer. I'm losing track of days these days, but Roger put out a post saying that as animal rights advocates, there are just certain words that we ought to drop. And there was a list of 4 words. And then there've been a lot of comments on that thread, haven't there, Roger? And
95.
A lot of, 95 comments on that post. And I thought it would be useful to actually investigate a little bit deeper into what is rattling our Rog here and with these words, because I think obviously to put out those words, a lot of people are going to read that and think, well, why are we banning these words? These are the words that are really prevalent in our movement. What are you going on about, Roger Yates? So I thought I'd ask Roger Yates, and here we are.
Steam coming out of my ears or something you said.
Yeah, your head, blood boiling, head vibrating, and steam coming out of your ears. That's how I imagine you when I hear these words as well. So I wanted to start with the word. I've started with the word carnism. Well, I think that might have been the top of your list as well. Hi, Gawain. Gawain's just joined us as well. So this carnism was coined by Melanie Joy, who's a social psychologist, in I think 2001, in her book Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. Roger has wrong side, that side. This book.
That book.
And that book. And on
product placement. That's my bookmark, folks.
Oh, that's a nifty little bookmark, isn't it? ViaLife. Is that when they send you all those massive boxes of ViaLife cheese for you to give away?
Yeah,
VIP. Do they give you a big bookmark?
We used to have a few of those. We used to have them on the stall itself. So.
Capitalist. Just kidding. So carnism is described as, this is how it's described, as a concept used in the discussion of humanity's relation to other animals, defined as a prevailing ideology in which people support the use and consumption of animal products, especially meat. And an important feature of carnism is the classification of only particular species of other animals as food, and the acceptance of those practices, and practices that are rejected as unacceptable to other species. And of course, that classification will be culturally relative, depending on which other animals are deemed acceptable for consumption. So do tell us, Dr. Yates, what is it about carnism that really rattles you?
I think I've got a pretty good handle on why it's popular amongst vegans, even though it's a vegetarian concept. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But I think it's popular because it's got a bit of a kind of sneer about it. You're a carnist type of thing. Because the main claim about carnism is it's the opposite of veganism, whereas really it's the opposite of vegetarianism. And the opposite of veganism is speciesism. And so when the book first came out, Melanie Joy was interviewed by AR Zone. I was part of the AR Zone team. And I asked, why did you go for this new concept of carnism rather than talking about speciesism? And she said that carnism is a sub-ideology of speciesism, like anti-Semitism is a sub-ideology of racism, for example, right? And so already from the start, she was never talking about all of it, right? And so it's heavily focused on meat. In fact, she uses the term meat, you know, no inverted commas like neither would use anything like that. And but subsequent copies of this book have kind of changed, which is an interesting movement issue. I think that's related to the idea that we in the grassroots have kind of created an acceptance within the national groups and the more mainstream people for using the word vegan, because even as late as about 4 years ago, you still got people like the vegan strategists saying that veganism is a scare word. And of course, Melanie Joy works closely with Tobias Leonhardt, you know. So in this book, and if people have got a different version now, you'll find some differences, I'm sure. But in this book, you'll see the bit that I've picked out in yellow there, if people can see that. That this is the index. There's all those references there to vegetarianism, and there's no reference to veganism. Although, funny enough, the word veganism comes up in the text. And so going to page 131, my favorite page of this. Because
page 131, everyone, did you make a note of that? Make a note,
131. But like I say, I think subsequent issues, they might have changed this because their position has changed and become a bit more vegan friendly now from this. And so here is a footnote, and the footnote is in relation to this sentence. It says the contamination of the contaminating effect of disgust explains why many vegetarians feel unable to eat food that has been cooked with or near meat. And then there's asterisks. And then the footnote is an interesting phenomenon I have observed. So this is Melanie Joy talking, is that many vegans, pure vegetarians who eschew all animal products, so this is calling vegans pure vegetarians, tend to be less disgusted by eggs and dairy products than they are by meat. Research on this phenomena is lacking. However, I suspect that because it's possible to procure eggs and dairy products without violence, these foods are perceived as less morally offensive and thus less disgusting. Right. So it's a vegetarian idea. And she says in the book that launched this idea that it's possible to get eggs and dairy without violence. Well, that's not a vegan thing to say, right? So I've always been a little bit baffled by why the vegan community is so keen on the word carnism, because it doesn't kind of do everything that we want it to do. Because, I mean, even the word carn, that's, you know, like carnivore, it's pointing as at meat. And if you look at the early presentations by Melanie Joy, she talks about meat almost exclusively and doesn't talk about anything else. Yeah. And I mean, she starts off with that Labrador thing. You know, you're having a lovely stew with somebody and you ask for the recipe and they said that they put Labrador meat into it. So it's always based on flesh consumption. So it's a vegetarian concept. So I've never really understood why. And I suppose you could say, well, all right, but you know, things evolve, and now it's evolved by being used within the vegan community. The concept has been veganized. But the actual
but has it though? Because really, if you think like you just said there, because of the structure of the word and carn, which is related to carne and carnivore, that immediately evokes that image of consuming flesh, doesn't it? And so even if in theory it relates to other uses of other animals, it's a term that comes very loaded with those implications of so-called meat eating and food consumption. And then because it's being referred to as the opposite of veganism, it's then bringing us into that problematic territory that veganism is a diet, which of course we know is the food element of being a vegan is only one aspect. But really all you're thinking there is abstaining from consuming flesh, which is, like you said, carnism is then really the opposite of vegetarianism. So I think we can't get away from the fact that carnism brings to mind flesh and meat eating, with no matter what, people might say it evolves too.
I
So do you
think,
think,
as always, just to intervene, sorry, Wendy, Tom makes a good point, as always, because I think this is true. I don't think Melanie Joy uses carnist. I think she's actually written to that effect. Yeah. So I think the reason that carnism became popular is because of the fact that you could translate that to carnist. And as I said, I think it's got that bit of a slur about it, that kind of, ooh, you're a carnist. And I think you were saying before we came on air that you see a lot of that. Oh, the carnists are doing this and the carnists said that, right? And it's almost like, the way the hunters call us antis. It's like a shortcut to the nasty people kind of thing, as it were.
And it's a bit like intersectional as well. That's become a label and a slur word, hasn't it? Even though intersectional really is not an identity, as we were speaking with Patrice on the show the other day. So it has become a slur. But I wonder, Roger, do you think that people who are using this term carnist, do you think they've actually read the book? Do you think they actually understand what it's relating to and have read that book and have thought that through? Or do you think it is literally just they've taken a word and they like having something they can throw around?
I think some people have. I think a lot of people haven't, and a lot of people said as much, because when you point out that it's Melanie Joy's phrase, they don't know that. So I mean, I think a lot of people think it was invented when carnism debunked came into being, but that's run by a reducitarian vegan anyway. So it's all the same problem. So,
So basically, your case is that carnism is basically reducing, by being framed as the opposite of veganism, is reducing veganism even more, when actually it refers more to, it's the opposite of vegetarianism. And as we know, vegetarianism is a diet, but veganism is certainly not. It's a philosophy and a principle.
I think that came up in one of the shows, actually, and I think some people in the comments, because I said, I'd regard vegetarianism as a diet and veganism as a philosophy. I think a lot of people objected to that, saying, there's a lot of people talked about veganism, vegetarian philosophy. So I suppose you get a bit of pushback from that, I think. But certainly in terms of the way I would think about it, I would think the way you just did, that if you hear the word vegetarian, you're thinking more about a diet. Whereas, and of course, the real problem is that a lot of people now do that with veganism. Whereas I think we would think of veganism as a philosophy, and that would immediately separate it out, from vegetarianism and everything else. And so anything that points to, it's kind of like anything that points in the wrong direction. What's the point of doing that? Because, the preference to all of this session really is that, social movements are claims makers. So our claims are important. In fact, our claims are the things that articulate our values. And so that means that our claims are very important and they need to be kind of accurate. And so, I mean, when we go on to the other words and everything, I mean, like, I have made the point, and I think Jeremy argued against this. I have made the point that I don't think any words are banned to use in outreach or whatever. It's just it's the frequency of them. And if we've got an animal rights movement, it's interesting that animal rights as a kind of philosophical idea is hardly ever articulated within the animal rights movement. We talk about cruelty and mercy and all the other things that we're going to come on to instead. And so it's almost as though we're frightened to actually make our case, the case for animal rights. We're frightened of it.
And maybe also there's a lack of understanding, because as we've talked about before, people coming into the movement, and there are a lot of new vegans within the last sort of 3-4 years who are out there doing activism, have probably not had that exposure to different language other than what's used prevalently within the movement. So, people are on YouTube and they're going to be following, the YouTube influencers and their kind of language, and they're going to be learning from those people and putting that into their advocacy as well. So you do get a lot of replication, I guess, and basing your outreach conversations on what you've heard. So unless they're exposed to this an alternative language.
That's right. I mean, like one of the main influences who uses the word cruelty over and over and very frequently is Joey Armstrong, but it's not his fault. I mean, he's come into a movement in which that's the dominant language, and so he's learned that, internalized it. I mean, like we're socialized into a movement, into a world that says don't be cruel, and then we get socialized into a movement that its main claim is don't be cruel. So it's not Joey's fault. It's just that, you know, the prevailing discourse of the animal rights movement is animal welfareism. So that's the problem. You know, people don't. I mean, you know, most people, you know, you say, you know, have people read the book? I mean, has anybody ever read any books nowadays? And so, you know, I mean, we know for a fact that most people have not read The Case for Animal Rights, and most people have not read Francione. Perhaps his more recent kind of pamphlet-like books, maybe, but certainly his more substantial work, they tend not to be aware of it.
Roger, Deb has made a comment. Didn't Melanie Joyce say that carnism is a chosen way of eating as opposed to being a carnivore, which is a biological category? So I guess that's just a distinction between the carnivore and carnism. But again, it still brings it down into the, you know, the paradigm of a diet food choice, doesn't it?
I don't think that's accurate, Deb, because she describes carnism as an invisible ideology. So it's not chosen. It's a socialized thing, I suppose, and so it's not chosen in that sense. But because it's invisible, you're not kind of aware of it. But then you see the same could be said about cultural speciesism. So everything that Melanie Joyce says about carnism can be said about cultural speciesism, and cultural speciesism covers all animal use, whereas carnism doesn't. So again, we're back to the same kind of issue, I suppose.
And to Elliot's point, actually, Elliot says, I suppose that prior to the term veganism, there was the term moral vegetarianism. And I think, because when I was really young, I went vegetarian when I was young, and I didn't really know anything about veganism or anything at that point. And I was vegetarian because of my love and respect for other animals. So at that time, I would have considered myself, I suppose, a moral vegetarian. Only with hindsight now, I realize that obviously wasn't really true. At the time, it felt like that. But that comes back to the point in that footnote from the book, actually, about being able to take eggs and milk without violence. And actually, as vegans, we realize that is, well, actually, I say as vegans, we realize that's not the case. But actually, that's not completely true, because I read in a lot of different threads, vegans still saying that they're happy to consume the eggs of hens that they've rescued, for example, or there'll be a whole conversation about, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to eat the eggs? Is it okay to if someone's rescued a cow and now they're happy and they live, is that okay? There's a lot of confusion still, I think, around the welfare aspects of, is it still okay to consume these products if it's in a more, you know, and a better welfare environment. But again, that just brings us back to welfareism all over again, doesn't it?
Most things do in this movement. I mean, also what Elliot said is right. I mean, I think people probably talked about moral vegetarians, but they certainly talked about pure vegetarianism to mean vegan. I mean, I think it was pure vegetarian is the phrase that was used in Diet for a New America by John Robbins, and that was in the 1980s when that came out. And so there's also total vegetarian to mean vegan too. And then I think there was a difference in terms of countries wise, because in North America, they started to talk about ovo-lacto vegetarian, these kind of ideas, because you ended up getting all kinds of different kind of splits, if you like, even within the vegetarian movement. And so I think then kind of pure or total vegetarian then meant what we would call vegetarian. So because I don't think that thing about ovo-lacto vegetarianism was so strong in Europe as it was in North America, but I could be wrong about that. That point that Deb said about Mark Beckhoff, interesting. I mean, for me, that just raises Donald Watson's point, which is the fact that people need to be ripened up to new ideas. You know, because another thing that the vegan strategist Tobias Leonhardt says is not only should you be sparing in the use of the word vegan, but you should be sparing with the use of the word animal rights and also speciesism. But the point is, if people don't know these things, these words, then we've got to get them to know these words by propagating them. That's the only way to do it.
And what about when people know the words, but the association with the words is a negative and derogatory? For example, a lot of people, when they hear animal rights, they immediately see people dressed in black in balaclavas. No blame here and no shame here, but that's what they see, and they see so your fault, Roger, and they see extremists. You know, they interpret it as extremist because obviously the media has really played into that as well. Extremist, terrorist, violence, and this is perhaps the images that people get in their minds when they hear the term animal rights, especially animal rights activists, for example, and even vegan. Now, I think sometimes there's been research that's been done to show that vegans are becoming like a real enemy to people in people's minds, like, you know, very unpopular. It's sometimes people just have the derogatory ideas about vegans and animal rights. So if it's not a fact of them not knowing the word, but knowing them with derogatory connotations, what would you say to that?
Well, again, people need to be ripened up to the, you know, at least kind of be given a kind of alternative view, and so they can then think, well, perhaps I was wrong about that, because obviously people's understanding of things evolve in the same way as it does in the movement. But I mean, I would think in terms of your first example, animal rights, probably the term animal liberation wouldn't probably. I mean, you know, because of the Animal Liberation Front, it wasn't the Animal Rights Front. So I think animal liberation is much more, you know, because I mean, obviously within the movement now we've got Animal Liberation Front, but we've also got Animal Liberation the book, which are kind of two different things, both using that phrase, you know, which is quite interesting. But I would have thought animal liberation could cause confusion, possibly. At the same time, it's our job, isn't it, as claims makers, to clarify what we mean, and that you know,
if we get the opportunity, which is I guess not always. And Nella's comment, hi Nella, says the majority of activists use a welfarist language, although their aim is the abolition of animal use. Perhaps it all comes down to not being aware of the power of language and not to conscious choice. And actually, Nella gave me a quote actually just before we came on, so thank you for this, Nella. Something from a feminist manifesto in 15 suggestions by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. And she says that language is the repository of our prejudices, our beliefs, and our assumptions. So obviously, you know, language is so crucial and so important. And I think we do have to be very mindful of the words we choose and understand the context and use them, you know, in the right context as well. I suppose we should move on to our next word, because we've just spent ages on carnism.
Well, Joan Denay would say that language is the repository of our lies as well, that we lie with our language. And so, you know, but I think there's something to do with, you know, this fear of certain words. Again, I mean, we were talking before we came on. Some people don't seem to think in the movement that words are important. This is, I'm always quoting this. This is the Animal Rights Crusade by two sociologists. But if you look at the picture here, it says, take a closer look. Need we say more? Right. And so this is the moral shock part of the movement, in the sense that we feel as though we need to shock people by showing them stuff. We even think we don't need to make an argument. It actually says, need we say more? I mean, they haven't said anything. They've shown you a picture. And it's kind of like, if somebody would have gone up to that person and said, well, why is that wrong? I'm sure she would have said, well, look. He said, yeah, but explain to me why it's wrong. And I think she would have said, but look. And I think that's the basis of the cubes and all the rest of it, is kind of, well, if you want to know why this is wrong, look, right? And it's kind of patently obvious if you look. If somebody says, okay, well, make the case for animal rights based on these images, I don't suppose most advocates could, because they don't know the case for animal rights. I mean, but they say, well, look, this is cruel. So
which brings us beautifully into the. I see what you did there, you see what you did there.
Yeah, smooth.
Nice little linking. Smooth. So if we think of cruel, and that obviously we're not really that kind of hot on dictionary definitions in the animal rights side, but willfully causing pain or suffering to others, or feeling no concern about it, and it's got synonyms such as brutal, savage, inhuman. So this is where we're going with cruel and cruelty. So start off there. Cruel.
Yeah, well, I'd immediately say, like I said before, that I don't regard that word as should be banned. Although my actual thing said words to ditch. Really, what I really meant, if I have to clarify that, is that it ought to be de-emphasized. So it's not our main claims making. I would say that our main claims making revolves around the case for animal rights, which is other animals are rights bearers, and that our use of them is a rights violation. It doesn't mean that we can't talk about cruelty, especially if the person you're talking to wants to do that. But let me just put this up on the screen. Now this is a chapter. You can get it online. You just have to put in Case for Animal Rights by Tom Regan, 1985. So it comes from this book.
What decade was that, Roger?
It was one of the ones in the 20th century. So I'll put that back up. I just want to show you the thing. So this is In Defense of Animals. It's edited by Peter Singer, but the second chapter is that one by Tom Regan. So if you do want to get this, actually quite an interesting book, this one from 1985. So the case came out in 1983. The chapter, the case, came out in 1985. Now this is the second edition. So don't be careful if you want to buy this book. If you get the second edition, Tom Regan's chapter about animal rights was taken out of it in this one from 2000s. And I think that in itself is a bit of an indication of the state of the movement, in the sense that in 1985, even a utilitarian would put in a chapter making the case for animal rights, whereas by the time it got to 2006, he took it out and replaced it with a chapter about utilitarianism. So, you know, for me, the issue is the strength of the argument, I think, now. And so this is the way that this chapter starts. As I said, you can get this online. Just put in Tom Regan, The Case for Animal Rights 1985, and it'll come up. And he said, I regard myself as an advocate of animal rights as part of the animal rights movement. That movement, as I conceive it, is committed to a number of goals. Now, it's the strength of the language here. The total abolition, the total dissolution, the total elimination. Now, to me, these are much better ideas than the weakness of saying, don't be cruel, right? Because cruelty claims are basically saying, don't be cruel. And what Regan says towards the bottom of this first paragraph, I think here, is he said, what's wrong, fundamentally wrong, with the way animals are treated isn't the details that vary from case to case, it's the whole system. And then he says, what is wrong isn't the pain, isn't the suffering, isn't the deprivation. These compound what's wrong. Sometimes, often, they make it much, much worse. But they are not the fundamental wrong. The fundamental wrong is using them. That's the rights violations, is using them in the first place. So I think that if you restrict yourself to cruelty claims, you're automatically putting yourself into a kind of weak language, and also into the into welfare paradigm, because animal cruelty and don't be cruel is a socialized value that everybody shares. It's very difficult to find anybody who says that they're in favor of animal cruelty. You can find a lot of people who say they're in favor of animal use, but without the cruelty, because that's the promise of animal welfarism, that you can have non-cruel use. That's the entire premise of it. And it's the same as if you use phrases like, are you opposed to causing other animals unnecessary suffering? Everybody would say yes to that. Now, the reason this becomes a movement issue for me is that this language of don't be cruel, and when we get to mercy as well, this language of don't be cruel is not connected to go vegan. Now, I think the vegan movement think there's a direct connection between the two, because I think the culture of cultural speciesism says, well, I agree with you. I don't like cruelty. I'm against cruelty, just like you are, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Vegan, but that doesn't imply veganism. That's why vegans get asked questions about, well, what about free range, and what about humane, and what about, because the conversation is now in the welfare paradigm, and so you're using weak language within the welfare paradigm, and you're trying to move that to veganism. And I think that kind of link between don't be cruel talk and go vegan talk is not necessarily there. And okay, you could say, well, we've got to make it there. It seems to me, though, that if you talk about animal rights, you get to veganism faster in a way, because if you talk about other animals being rights bearers, and if you talk about the use of other animals being rights violations, then that leads to veganism much quicker, it seems to me, because it's an obvious implication of that position, whereas don't be cruel isn't. So we're not kind of doing what we want to do. We're not using the language which fits where we want to go. It doesn't kind of make sense.
Yeah. Well, the trouble is, I suppose, that cruelty is obviously it's a very subjective term, isn't it? And the majority of people, like you said, do consider themselves to be against cruelty already, even though they're complicit in unthinkable cruelty every day of their lives. And I think people also seem to be able to disassociate from what they might consider cruel if they feel that it's necessary as well, because you might show someone footage, from a slaughterhouse, and they might be shocked at first, but once they've got over that initial shock, and at first they might say, oh, but that doesn't happen much, does it? And then you say, oh, but this is standard practice. This goes on. This is not anything unusual. This is standard practice. Then they kind of almost then start to go into those cognitive dissonance strategies, don't they? Of like, well, the justifications and the rationalizations, but oh, I suppose it's just that we have to do it then, and maybe we should. And if you ask them, well, how would you deal with this? How would you take away this cruelty? They just start to say, oh, we need to look at different ways of doing it. That's what people automatically come out with. I've had so many conversations like that with people in the street where they will say, we need to stop doing it like this. We need to find a different way. and it's there is that complete disconnection of it's they want to carry on because they don't want to have to change their ways, their behaviors, and completely look at their own value system. They just want to carry on as they are, but disassociate from this, what they now see as maybe it's a bit more cruel than I realized, but that's not the issue for them. The issue is they want to find a less cruel way of continuing that practice to happen, so that they can continue.
Of course, again, we're back to socialization. When kids are given animal companions, then and given is the right phrase because they are items of property, they're told not to be cruel to their new item of sentient property, right? So the animal welfare paradigm is not opposed to using other animals; it's opposed to being cruel to them. So when we say don't be cruel, it doesn't imply don't use other animals. It means take the cruelty out of it. I think I first came in, I started to think this way when I saw Shack as the title of the group, stopping Huntingdon animal cruelty. And I thought, well, that's not what we want to do, is it? We want to abolish the place, so we want to abolish the experiments going on in the place. We want to completely end it. We don't want to just take the cruelty out. You see, but people would think, well, I'm with you. If you're talking about taking the cruelty out of things, I'm all for that. But then you go, so therefore go vegan. And you go, hang on a minute, why would I do that? You know, I've just said I agree with you on the don't be cruel bit. When we say therefore go vegan, that bit doesn't culturally fit. I think that bit is culturally incoherent. I think it just doesn't follow.
Yeah. The dots are not joined up, and I had a conversation recently on my podcast with Maria. I always try and get her name right. Ionithu. No, I probably said that really badly, didn't I? It's a Greek name. Ionithu. Anyway, she's did a really great podcast with me, and we were talking about that very thing of how sometimes, and Maria's a psychologist, of how the dots don't always join up for people when we might think they do, because for us they do. So for example, we were talking about the example of when we show people the images of, for example, we'll put the image of a dog next to the image of a cow and say, and expect non-vegans to go, oh my God, it all makes sense now that a dog is the same as a cow, and therefore I should just literally see the error of my ways and turn vegan. And of course, in people's minds, that's not what happens. They often don't really make that connection, even because socialization has been so strong, and therefore they don't really put the dots just don't join up. And it's the same way as with cruelty and going vegan. There's the journey from A to B is just not there. There are gaps in the middle. So maybe if anything, even if we do use the word cruel, because as you said, we don't necessarily want to ban words or have to, not use words at all, but we have to put them in context, and we have to make connections of why we're using the word cruel, and why actually cruelty is there because of the fundamental wrong, which is the use. So cruelty only arises because we have the use of these individuals. The cruelty wouldn't exist without that. So we have to come down to that fundamental wrong and explain cruelty within that context, I think.
I'll tell you another example, and I'm sure I've given this before, so excuse me if you're hearing what you've already heard, but the VIP in Vigo in Dublin, we've got 12 of these 7 foot tall, well, I think they're 6.5 foot tall banners. They're yay wide and this tall. And one I was putting them up one day, and this guy came up to me and he goes, this is bullshit, or this is rubbish, I think he said. And I said, what is? He said, well, it's not as cruel as this. And I said, well, actually, our position isn't based on cruelty. It's based on rights and rights violations. And he said, no, it's not. And and I thought this is interesting. I've been told now what my position is by somebody else. And of course, what they've done is they've kind of seen all the kind of claims in the movement before. I mean, I don't know whether the guy was a farmer, possibly a farmer, and just thought that by I was going to come out with cruelty talk. And so it's not as cruel as that. Well, that's irrelevant to me, mate, kind of thing. No, it's not. And so I thought, well, this is really interesting. And in the sense that there's also another thing where if you're interviewed by a journalist, they'll probably ask you about cruelty, because again, they think that the movement is to reduce or to eliminate cruelty. That's what they think the movement is. Why did they get this ridiculous idea? It's because we keep saying that's what this movement is. I mean, Joey Carbstrong even says phrases like, our thing is to eliminate the worst abuses and cruelty to animals. He uses that phrase, the worst abuses and cruelty to animals. That's pure animal welfare talk. You get that talk from the RSPCA, the Royal Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. It's animal welfareism. So
to that point as well, well, these people, that's what they see as animal rights, because animal rights is used as such an umbrella term for anything to do with animal protection or welfare or anything. I think that's what the majority of people are aware of. They wouldn't distinguish between rights and welfare anyway, and for them it's all to do with animal rights. So when they're seeing adverts on the television from the RSPCA, or they're hearing people talk about cruelty to animals. That's their world, that's their environment, that's their exposure. So no wonder they believe that. So I guess that's where, again, it's even more important that if you are an animal rights advocate, that you don't stay in that paradigm, and that you don't use that same language that the RSPCA would use, who are putting their stamp on, dead animals' bodies in the supermarket to say this is high welfare. We want to distinguish ourselves from that talk and from that language. Surely we don't want to be in that same paradigm of welfare. That's not to say welfare doesn't have its place in some places. I'm sure, sometimes if the RSPCA are going out to help a neglected and, injured other animal, a dog or whoever, that's not to say that doesn't have its place, but we don't want to be...
No, I mean, that part of the RSPCA is really good. I had a blog entry from years ago, and it was called Big Wow, Welfarists Do Welfare. And of course they do. And, that work from the RSPCA and the ISPCA and people like that, HSUS, that's all very important. But it's welfare work, and they don't pretend to be rights groups. The RSPCA, again, the confusion in the movement is people get confused because the RSPCA have put a stamp of approval on a bit of animal flesh. Well, yeah, they're an animal welfare group. Compassion in World Farming, started by a dairy farmer, animal welfare group. We've almost as though, Elliot here mentions Francione. And, Francione really brought the distinction between welfare and rights into the movement. And that's kind of gone again now. And, of course, you've got that kind of hybrid situation of new welfarism. But, it's as though it's all kind of morphed back into the kind of welfare base of the movement. And there's no distinction being made anywhere anymore. And so, veganism is almost like sliding back into welfarism, into vegetarianism, and animal rights is sliding back into welfare. And those are things that would concern me. In relation to what Elliot says here about, animals' rights, that's something from about 1921, I think, or at least very early on in the thing. In fact, I think 1921 was Henry Salt's autobiography, and he called it 70 Years Among Savages, which is a great title for an autobiography. But I think there is a Henry Salt archive online. I think they're all there, I think. I think if you put in Henry Salt archive, you'll probably find that. But it's interesting because like Henry Salt and Donald Watson had an argument because Salt was opposed to veganism, apparently. He was a vegetarian, but he was opposed to veganism. He thought veganism was a bit absurd, I think. So,
a bit extreme.
Yeah.
Probably. And just
all right.
we don't
there it is, yeah. Okay. Yeah. A while ago, Elliot, a while ago.
Not the 1980s, the 1890s.
Yeah.
Still the same numbers, Roger. You can't escape those numbers.
Yeah.
Going back to something that Deb's actually commented on from Race, and Race's comment was a little bit higher up, talking about, I think it was Race who said this, talking about when you...
This one? This is the answer to it.
That's the answer to it. So there's a comment just a few up from that, from Race, I believe, who says that what you were saying about we need to connect... That's it. You were saying about how animal rights leads us more easily into veganism because the dots join up better. But Race is saying when we say animal rights, that leads them to saying vegans are trying to get cows, driver's licenses. But this is the point. I think this is where we have to then we have to ripen them up and explain the position is not about legal rights and it's not about positive rights. It's about the inherent basic moral rights. So that's where I guess
negative rights, yeah,
and negative rights, not being used, not being killed, not being bred, those negative rights. So it's not about legal rights and it's not about positive rights. So this is where I think some understanding of the philosophy of animal rights really does come in very useful when you are having those conversations, because then you can make that distinction that it's not about those rights of rights to education, right to drive, right to vote and all that. It's very, very different. It's an inherent moral basic right. So,
yeah, I'd say that. And then so Deb replied to that then with this one, right?
exactly.
Moral rights, yeah, okay, yeah. You see, I mean, again, understanding animal rights is simple once you get a grip of moral rights, legal rights, and positive rights and negative rights. Once you get that in your head, it's very easy then just to knock all that. I was almost going to say knock it on the head, but that wouldn't be right. But you can just dispense with those arguments pretty quickly just by understanding those four concepts.
Have you just seen the comment from Vegan Cannibal? I'm saying nothing. Vegan Cannibal.
That one, you mean? That one, you mean? Yeah.
Roger wasn't seeing when the book came out. Cheeky, Vegan Cannibal, very cheeky. So should we move on to the next word?
Yeah, you could do before somebody else takes the mickey out of me. Yeah.
So I think just kind of to sum up the cruelty thing, I think it's not, as we keep saying, it's not a matter of banning the word, but using it in context, understanding it's not the aim of animal rights. It's only a part of it. The fundamental wrong is the use. We're aiming for abolition and, that respecting inherent moral basic rights and those negative rights. I did want to kind of touch on going into emotional responses and things like that, but I don't know if we have time.
I mean, cruelty talk is actually quite useful if the other person does it, because it gives you the opportunity to say that we're not based on cruelty. But that often doesn't happen. You get entire conversations. In fact, most entire conversations on YouTube or social media are all within the cruelty welfare paradigm. But you get the word animal rights thrown about every now and again, but it's rhetorical at that stage. It's just a label. We're animal rights. We're against animal cruelty. See, that's not coherent.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are against cruelty, but we're just against a lot more than that as well. I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? It's not that we're not, not that we're not against cruelty.
Yeah.
We totally are as well. So
fair point.
Just to make that a little bit clearer. Imagine going into the street going, look, we're animal rights activists. We're not against cruelty, okay? We don't need that either.
That wouldn't be too good either, yeah.
That wouldn't be too good.
Scratch that last point, folks.
So the next one is, this is a funny one for me actually, animal lover.
Yeah, you said it before, didn't you? Now,
animal lover. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we talk about a nation of animal lovers in relation to, it's often said that Britain is a nation of animal lovers, and I'm sure other countries say the same. In the same way as farmers say that we've got the best welfare in the world. It's something that is just kind of said. But again, it doesn't imply veganism. And in terms of the argument for the case for animal rights, it's not love or fondness that's the key. It's respect for their rights and respect for their moral rights, which they already have by dint of the argument for rights. So it's not giving them rights. And so you don't have to love human beings. I mean, like, there's probably quite a lot of human beings that everybody could think of that they probably dislike quite a lot, but that wouldn't stop them.
How long have you got?
Yes, right. Wouldn't stop them having rights, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't love all other animals. I mean, some of them are a pain in the ass, but I mean, that doesn't mean they don't have rights. But it's not a prerequisite. I think that again, I think it leads back to the welfare paradigm in some senses, in the sense that if you love them and you think they're cute and you kind of go weak at the knees when you see a puppy, then that's the kind of pet owning kind of feeling, and those kind of things, and and of course I always say one of the worst things about baby other animals is the fact that they're very cute. And it's a damn shame that they are.
The downfall, isn't it? It's the downfall. Yeah. Good to know, Rafe. Rafe says, I actually really dislike certain animals. I dislike a lot of humans. I still don't torture them or kill them. I'm really glad that you clarified that, Rafe. And Vegan Gaze was saying, yeah, no exploitation and violation of their moral rights and autonomy, but cruelty is fine. LOL. Yeah, that could be dangerous. Yeah, so Elliot's saying as well, I'm not an animal lover. It's funny thing because I suppose I've come from a very, very different place to that. I just from being a very, very young child, I was very much in love with other animals. I had such an affection and affinity and a fondness for them. And that's what led me to, first of all, becoming vegetarian. As soon as I realized who was on my plate, that was it. It was like, no, that's not happening. So I think, and then out of that, as I've learned and as I've evolved, then I've come to very much understand respect, and even more and more every day, I want to know more about their individuality, their personalities, to try and undo and dismantle all my own socialization as a speciesist, you know, which is still there. Even if you don't, even no matter how hard you work, there are still things that you find yourself saying or doing or not thinking in terms of other animals, and of how much we are dominant and controlling as humans, as much as vegans we really try not to be. And I think that has evolved for me out of a place of love. And I think it does for many people. I think a lot of people would say that they had a connection, or when they made a connection to another animal, then they started to become more aware of them as individuals, and that led them into looking into animal rights and becoming vegan. And so I suppose, like you said, it's not a prerequisite. It's not essential to love them. It's essential to respect them. But I suppose that respect can grow from a place of love, I think, as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. The interesting part about the animal lover talk, though, is the fact that you've got the thing in the movement that you can't be an animal lover and eat them, whereas that's exactly what the cultural speciesism says you can do, because you know the eating them is fine so long as you don't cause any cruelty. So you know, so if again, I think in terms of what says what we really want to say, respect them or love them, which says which implies veganism, right? So it's kind of like, you know, I suppose it's the kind of shortest cut to, I mean, we all want to have a vegan conversation with people, and so you know, I tend to think, well, let's use words that are consistent with that discourse. Then that, I suppose that's part of my logic to it, and I don't want to get bogged down and lost in the welfare paradigm at any stage. But I mean, animal lover. I mean, I'm not as rabid about that as some other words, as you know, Wendy.
I don't know what you're talking about, Roger. Honestly.
No.
And as well, and I think Vegan Gaze has just alluded to this as well. I was just thinking as you were saying that actually, you know, there are a lot of people out there who claim to love other animals, like you hear it from farmers all the time. But I love my, obviously, ownership of my animals. I love them, and of course, then you know they're sending them in a truck off to be slaughtered, or they're artificially impregnating, and all the practices that go on, as we know, and they still claim to love them, and who's to question that they do or they don't? So therefore, yeah, love is not the answer, because again, it's quite a subjective term, isn't it? We perhaps all define love in a different way, and maybe there's that disconnection. You can love up to a certain point, but it's still, you know, that's the utility of that other animal is to be consumed. So therefore, I can love that other animal in as far as, you know, I can care for them. I can give them food and water and make sure they're you know, that they're safe and well to a certain point. And yet I still I'm fine with sending them off to be killed at the end of their, you know, that time. So it is a very subjective idea.
When I was doing the first initial kind of work for my PhD, the internet was fairly new in those days, and I put out a call saying, you know, can you give me some examples of interactions you've had with people on the street and everything? And somebody from, I think it was called London Animal Action, I think, wrote to me and said that some teenagers came up, and they said that they wanted to sign our petition because they're all animal lovers. And so the person said to the teenagers, "Oh, so you're all vegetarians then?" And they said, "Oh no." And he said, "Well, you know, how's that work then?" And said, "Well, we're animal lovers," and the word animal to them meant cats and dogs, and so, you know, cows and pigs weren't even animals, and so it's just not where you want to be. Whether you're talking about, you know, when you're in this kind of language area. I mean, I know that one's really about animals, but they were talking about being animal lovers. But to them, that meant they loved animals who were cats and dogs. You know, and that kind of caused all kind of confusion, you can imagine, in the conversation that they had.
Again, similar to the cruelty thing, people will accept cruelty if it's necessary, and also with love, people will love other animals that are in the right category, the category of other animals who are meant to be loved. So, for example, dogs, cats, here maybe horses to a point, but they will love those ones. But then anyone outside of those categories, then that's a whole different thing, isn't it? It's a different attitude. So yeah, respect is where we need to go with that. Respect.
It can go. I mean, I suppose we make arguments both ways in a way, because I mean, Deb's saying, I know a hunter who says, and you do get that. We had a farmer come up about 5 years ago. Farmer came up in Temple Bar, up to the gazebos, which Jennifer insists on calling a tent, but to the gazebos, and he said, you know, look, you know, don't you be telling me anything about this, because I'm a farmer and I love my animals. And his daughter had just gone into the pub, which is directly opposite from where we used to be, and he said, yeah, and do you regard them as members of your family? He said, yeah, I love them. They're members of the family. And I said, so when are you taking your daughter to the slaughterhouse? And he goes, oh, point taken. He says, and of course, so it goes both ways in that sense, because I suppose I was saying you're not an animal lover, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, it's a
at the same
kind
time,
of love, isn't it?
yeah, I suppose.
Oh, you're gonna like this one, Roger. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Oh, vegan cannibal.
Oh, fur baby, yes.
Fur babies.
Oh, yes. I've always really disliked that, fur babies.
Yeah, and yet it's something that a lot of people say, and I must admit, I have said that I don't say that anymore. But in the past, I did used to use that, fur babies. I think it's, for me, this it brings up an interesting thing about language, actually, because often I feel like the relationship that I have with the feline folk who I share my home with and who I care for and I do love, I feel that there is no word to describe our relationship or the way I feel about them. So it used to be, you know, like, oh, they're fur babies, because it's like you see them almost like you love them as much as you would a child. But then the relationship is probably different to with a human child, but it's no less worthy. And I think it just feels sometimes that the words aren't there in our speciesist world, and the you know, the language that we're kind of evolving, it just isn't there sometimes. And I think that's why we sometimes revert to things like that, like fur babies, or we call them our children or the kids. Sometimes I'll say, oh, the kids, because I don't think there is a word that.
Do you say come to mummy? Do you, Wendy? Come on, confession time. You say come to mummy.
I sometimes I say things like, I'll say, I'll do, mum will do that, and then I say, no, your housemate will do that, and then I think, yeah, what is it? Who am I to you? Like, if you had to choose a word, who would I be to you? And it's really difficult. It's really difficult, because I feel like I'm their carer, but I feel like I'm more than a carer, because there's so much affection and we've really built up a real strong bond. I don't know. I think we need to find some words.
I think my position on that is that I think it's from feminist theory about infantilism of adults. Yeah. And obviously, you know, so it's akin to calling grown women girls, I suppose. But it's kind of like you often see kind of who's, you know, a 15-year-old dog who's been abandoned, needs rehoming. Who's going to care for this baby boy? Right?
Yeah.
you know, and so you think, whoa, hang on a second, you just said 15-year-old. So it's kind of like, because I think that even aspects of our law regards them as kind of like surrogate children or in a children kind of situation. So you can kind of understand that, but I've always pushed back about that, because again, it's about respect. So if you're if it's all based on respecting their rights, then, you know, it just kind of demeans them a little bit, I think, to then start calling them children when they're really adults.
Absolutely. And I remind people all the time, like sometimes if someone will say to me, oh, you know, they're the baby, and I said, well, he's not a baby, he's a fully grown adult. And sometimes like with Brian, and I say he's a man cat. I just call him a man cat because I don't know what else to say about him. It's like, he's not a baby, he's a man cat. But he might not identify as that. I don't know. And that's a whole other thing, isn't it? But yeah, it's very difficult with language that just isn't there to represent. It's almost very lacking. There are gaps in our language, I feel, for the relationships that we have. But I totally get that whole thing about infantilizing, and I try really hard to think about that all the time now. How can I better respect these individuals every day? How can I give, you know, take my control and dominance away as much as I possibly can, in order to let them be the, you know, the determine their own actions and have that autonomy as much as possible. It's very difficult, but you have to really be aware.
Do you know the answer? Do you know the answer to this one, Wendy? Because it doesn't sound like Peter Singer.
The realm of parity. I mean, he doesn't really believe in rights, does he? Anyway.
No, he thinks that rights are not a good basis for a social movement, for one thing. I always say that he used to bitterly complain about it, but he's kind of given up. And I think it's because the movement almost said, well, we're going to call you animal rights, whether you like it or not. You know, Peter still described animal liberation as an animal rights philosophy book, which it isn't. And but there is a recent video with Singer, and he does clarify it. And he said, well, look, can I just make a pedantic point? You know, you mentioned animal rights. I'm not in favor of animal rights. You know, that's not my position. It never has been, kind of thing. But he's kind of given up on that now. He used to do it all the time, but he's kind of given up. And I think it's because we don't have a very philosophically sophisticated movement. And I think that's also probably why Tom Reagan went back into the movement when Gary Francione really wanted to split from it. So Francione went and created a counter movement. And Reagan kind of went back into the welfare movement, as opposed to try and inject it with some rights from within, I suppose.
That turned out well.
Yeah. It's easy done, isn't it?
Easily done, just like that. Ta-da! Well, Roger, I've saved the best till last. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, of course.
Do you want to cover your ears up? Just while I say. Well,
no, I wrote it. It was painful enough writing that down on the banner before.
So the last word on the list that we're going to talk about is mercy. Mercy. Yeah. Usually Roger's head explodes around about now.
It goes back again to the strength of the argument, I think. And again, you know, if you think about in terms of, you know, the language from Reagan, you know,
sorry, I'm just in a comment from Ray, so just let me chuckle.
So the idea that we're begging for mercy just seems to me nothing to do with what we want. You know, it's kind of like a weak position. I've always felt that Mercy for Animals, the group, is probably the worst name you could think of. You know, if you could stand for a million years thinking of bad names, and that's probably going to be the worst one, because, you know, animal rights is more of a demand. It's other animals have rights, not that they should be given them, that they have rights. And it's our job. I mean, Reagan said two things. It's our job to respect the rights they have, and also it's the job of the law to codify them into law, because ideally moral rights would become legal rights. Yeah, but I mean, they wouldn't stop being moral rights. So if anybody then abolished that law, those rights would still be there. But so the idea that we're begging for mercy, and a little bit like, oh, please have mercy for the animals, or please don't be cruel. These to me seem like weak in terms of claims making. Whereas I think you say, well, our position is to establish the idea that other animals are rights bearers, rights holders, and that our use of them is a rights violation. And so therefore we demand respect for their rights. We're not begging for mercy. So I just hate that word in the context of a movement. It just seems so weak and wishy-washy,
Wishy-washy. When if you look up mercy as well, the definition is compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm. So that completely puts the power with the person showing the mercy. And I think the last thing we want to be doing in this movement is disempowering other animals anymore. We need to be empowering them. We need to be their allies. So we do not want to be calling for mercy, for sure, because we're just reinforcing that paradigm of power over, our dominance, the control, the hierarchical thinking that puts other animals as inferior. And we just need to dismantle that. And language is a big part of how we do that. So, yeah, I think I totally get it. I totally get why your head explodes on this one. It is. And
I wonder if anybody can answer Deb's question. I mean, are there other social justice movement that uses that term, kind of children's rights movements, have mercy on the children? I mean, you just can't imagine it, can you? And I do appreciate, I suppose people don't actually say have mercy, but that's what it means, mercy for animals, Yeah. And so I just think that it gives the entire wrong impression, seeing that term. And again, mercy for animals, interesting, was one of those groups that had to be dragged screaming and kicking into the vegan world because they would put out some pretty graphic videos a few years ago, and then at the end it would say go veg, and same as Viva and Animal Aid would do all that, because they were all buying into that idea that veganism is a scare word. And so all of this points to the fact that the grassroots have kind of proven them wrong in that respect. I don't suppose that they'd ever see it that way themselves, but as I said, it's not that long ago that Leonard was going around telling everybody not to use the word vegan because you're going to scare the pants off everybody and everything, or even saying things like if somebody offered you a lot of money, you should eat flesh and stuff like this, so then you can use the money for animal rights. So that, I think, it's just kind of part and parcel of the kind of reducitarian kind of impulse there is in the movement, and it's all to do with kind of sliding for me. Animal rights slides into welfare, veganism slides into vegetarianism if you're not careful. I mean, several years ago, somebody wanted to come up with the phrase lacto-vegan, right? And then you had that idea about vegan until 6, vegan except for bacon. Yeah, these are all ideas that were floating around, and so in the same ways you ended up with lacto-vegetarian. They wanted a lacto-vegan. There's always something. And I mean, I think some people said it about cheese because we all get that thing, especially from vegetarians.
I could go vegan, but I couldn't give up my cheese.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, ain't your cheese, mate. It's calf food.
No, it ain't yours. Step away from the cheese, and
step away from the stolen goods. I always say that handling stolen goods is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And Louise was saying it's centered on humans giving mercy as well. Again, it totally does center the human there, doesn't it? Showing mercy. And then Race brought up the point because she said, is it ever used elsewhere? And Race was saying that there's Mercy Children Hospital and religions use the word mercy for their aid. And then Deb has countered this with they're not social justice centered. I suppose the thing is, it's like we're saying there's no words that we should ban and say we should never use this, and maybe mercy might be up there though. But it's more the fact that if we're trying to empower other animals and we're trying to give a strong, clear message, we have to use language in a strong, clear way. because it's such a difficult job that we have on our hands anyway. We have to use every tool we have. And if we're going to use the term wishy-washy, Roger, and I think that's a brilliant way to describe it. If we're going to send wishy-washy messages with our wishy-washy language, we're going to get wishy-washy results. We have to have strong, clear messages and just be really mindful of the language we're using. Why are we choosing that word? What does it say? Does it have the desired effect that we're trying to create with that word? Or that, you know, can we put it more into context? Can we give it more explanation, join up the dots from through our language to other people who might not quite make that link so easily?
I don't really get this one. Do you, Wendy, really? I mean, they go on to say about the Bible talks about mercy, have mercy on your soul and stuff like that. But,
I think does that go back to kind of Roman gladiator events as well, where, you know, it would be either they would die or you show them mercy and they live, that kind of connotation, perhaps?
Oh, that bit, yeah.
Which we can never work out which way it is. Do they die there or there? We're not quite sure. Maybe someone on here will know.
The thing is, though, I don't suppose there's anybody in this chat or who would watch this recording even, who would, if a journalist went up to them and said, so, you know, to tell me about what your movement's all about, who would answer, well, we want mercy for other animals? Who would say that? Right? I mean, you just wouldn't say it, would you?
To be honest, I don't hear people using that. Cruelty, yes. Carnism, yes. Animal lover, yes. Mercy, not so much. So maybe your wishes have been granted just little by little, Roger.
I was going to mention the fact that
I have no idea what about that.
For a year, just after it was radicalised, I was a committee member of the BWV, and that was called the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. And then Kim Stoll was the campaign manager, I think that was the title, and they started a new banner which is against all animal experiments. And then a few years later, when the radicals have been booted out by moderates, they changed it to against animal experiments, and they took that all bit out. And now they call it Cruelty Free International, taking all reference to abolition out of it now.
Yeah.
You know, and again, this is all to do with on
their sites as well. They have got some products that are not vegan as well. So I think that's something to be really mindful of as well. That even though it might be cruelty free in terms of it's passing their criteria for not being tested and the ingredients and the cutoff dates and all those things, that the products themselves are not always vegan. Some of them I've noticed on there contain honey, for example. So you do the cruelty free thing and the vegan thing don't always match. So you have to look for cruelty-free and vegan as well. But yeah, cruelty-free. Yeah, absolutely.
Race is looking for a ref.
I think there's been a little bit of a competition. I think it was Race has been giving lots of examples of where mercy is used, and Deb was saying it's not being used in social justice. And then Race came back with a few more examples, and then said it's not a contest, but I won.
Yeah.
And then is there a ref?
A competition in the chat today. A bit of competition.
Healthy competition. And Louise is asking, why are some people afraid to use direct language? That's a good point, actually. Why are? Because you right at the start, Roger, you did say it's you know, a lot of the big organizations, they were very reluctant to use the word vegan, and even still now it's only a new thing that a lot of the big organizations are advocating for veganism as opposed to vegetarianism, which it would have been before. And so I wonder why are people afraid to use that? Is it that almost trying to get your foot in the door kind of mindset, where if I just talk about this, then I'll be able to take it a little bit further. But then you have to do that job, though, don't you? You have to do the job of joining the dots up. You can't just leave it, get your foot in the door with cruelty and then go vegan, everyone. You have to do that, make that journey somehow.
Yeah, I guess that could be part of it. I mean, I think that, I've talked about the movement moderating. I suppose the fact that they have finally, even though kind of it took a while, and it's only recently that they've finally embraced veganism is a good thing. That's kind of, it's going in the right direction. I mean, the example for that has got to be Viva. I mean, Viva now, they've got a tagline, the vegan charity, I think it is. Whereas obviously the name is Vegetarians International Voice for Animals, which they never advertise that. They call themselves Viva in order to hide the fact that they're, the first V means vegetarian.
It was lucky because obviously obviously Viva have been going for 25 years, and it used to be more of a vegetarian organization, because I knew them when I was young and I was vegetarian. I used to follow Viva quite a lot on their campaigns, and it was vegetarian. And I don't even know if they've actually officially changed that, like with Company House or anything like that. But yeah, now it's more Viva.
I don't know. No, I mean, it'd be interesting. I mean, whether they've gone to the level of doing that. I don't think anybody.
But isn't
ever
it fortunate that vegan starts with a V? Otherwise, that would have been a bit of a.
Yeah, going back to the BYV thing, you were saying that some of their products have got animal products in it, but they're declaring that this product is cruelty free.
Absolutely, I've had many a conversation with people on the phone about that with Cruelty Free International, and they just keep saying, "Well, this is our focus. This is where we're putting our focus." And they don't.
No, but they're not presumably saying that something's got gelatin in, for example, rather than honey, because they might make the claim about honey. But would they be saying, well, they wouldn't be saying presumably because you can make those things in a non-cruel way, would they? It's just that they want to. I mean, when they say the word cruelty, they're talking about vivisection only, aren't they?
Focus on so actually it doesn't really do with what it says on the tin anyway, to be honest, because their focus is on vivisection, and a lot of, to be fair, a lot of the products are vegan, but there are some are not, so you just have to be mindful when you're looking through the ingredients, and just know that they're not all vegan. But obviously their focus is on the anti-vivisection, and that's what they kept bringing me back to when I questioned them on this. And
well, there's some feedback for you there.
Yeah. Juliet was the youth officer with the Vegetarian Society. Yeah, so they've been around a long time. But yeah, fortunately now they are advocating for veganism.
I remember Viva when Michael Mansfield used to write for them a lot. The famous human rights lawyer.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
he's still closely affiliated with them. So that was the end of our.
I'm out of bad words. Use the word. Do
you feel a little bit purged having done that, Roger? Do you feel a bit like it was a cathartic experience doing that?
No, because I'll open up Facebook, and the first thing is, don't be cruel to animals, not even other animals, and be an animal lover meme. So no. It's going to make no difference.
Why love one and eat the other?
Yeah.
So I think we can definitely put mercy into room 101 if we had the lever. Putting that in, definitely. Carnism. Yep, that's in.
Yeah.
Animal lover, I'm only saving because obviously I don't want to advocate to be an animal lover. I want people to respect other animals, but as I am an animal lover, I can't put that in just because I love them. And cruelty, I'd say within context, like obviously we're against cruelty. We have to make that really clear, but just put it into the context of rights and the fundamental wrong being the use, not the treatment. Yeah, so just make that distinction between the welfareism and the inherent basic rights.
Louise has gone all intersectional on us. Goddamn intersectionals.
Absolutely.
What's that got to do with animal rights? What's that got to do with veganism? Yeah.
Damn those intersectional toxic people.
Indeed.
So thank you, Roger. Thank you for coming and clarifying that. That's been a really great chat, and it's good to just sort of mull that over. And there's been some really great comments. Thank you to everyone who's been commenting and following the chat. And if you've got anything else to say before we go, now's the time, because we've gone to 1 hour 20. Yeah, sorry, Roger. Let me just saying sorry. Thanks, Deb. This is a great topic and discussion yet again. Thanks for this, Roger, Wendy, and everyone. And thank you, Deb, and thank you to everyone else for joining us. So we will see you again on Monday, I believe, Roger.
With the full team.
With the full team on Monday, we have Ronnie Lee coming on as our guest. We're going to be talking about, should we announce it?
Could do.
Shall we? Or not? Is that dangerous?
We're going to talk about the issue of violence.
Violence. Oh, that's going to be a corker.
So maybe Ronnie will have mercy on our souls.
Oh, and Louise, you've got to talk with Louisa tomorrow. She's saying see you tomorrow, Roger. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Instagram. So yeah, Louisa Jane Moss, I think, is the full IG, or is it? I don't know what's your actual IG ID, Louisa. Probably quick for me to look it up.
She might have gone.
Yeah. Oh,
she might have gone now.
Yeah, that was.
Roger has a chat with Louisa on Louisa Moss.
Oh, she's all right. Okay. Moss. Yeah. Right.
So Roger has a chat with Louisa tomorrow. What time, Roger?
This is at 12 o'clock.
Ah.
I thought you'd gone to care for your fur babies then for a minute, Louisa. So, okay, I suppose we better shut this down before.
Let go, you.
So, thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.